Part 97. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 961. Chapter 961. What a pervert. Because he set off in a hurry, after Fan Kinjao returned to Hua's house with King Xin in his arms and cleaned up briefly, he hurriedly got into the carriage again and went to the city gate to join the large group of people. There were 2 carriages in total. Fan Kinjao asked his nanny to take King Xin, Wu Qiuzao and Rengir in one, while he and Cao Lishan squeezed into the smaller carriage. At this time, the city gate had already been heavily guarded. All the princes arrived early, and many ministers and their families were sitting in carriages quietly waiting for the emperor's arrival. Fan Kinjao came a little late, but after all, the identity of the crown princess was there, and no one dared to really say anything. Besides, as long as the empress didn't show up, it wasn't really too late. It was Bailey Fengming who was riding on horseback. He saw Fan Kinjao's carriage and rode over quickly. But he didn't expect that when he lowered his head and looked through the window, what he saw was not Fan Kinjao, but Wu Qiuzao and wet nurse. Wu Qiuzao didn't expect to see His Highness the Crown Prince when he raised his eyes, so he quickly said, "The common people have seen His Highness the Crown Prince." Bailey Fengming smiled lightly and said, "No need to be polite." Of course Wu Qiuzao knew that His Highness the Crown Prince was not here to see her, so he quickly pointed to the carriageway in front. "My sister is in the carriage in front. Do you need some civilians to lead the way for His Highness the Crown Prince?" "No need, I'll just go by myself," Bailey Fengming said, tightening his grip on the horse's belly. Unexpectedly, King Xin, who had been sleeping soundly at this time, opened his eyes. The moment he looked at Bailey Fengming, his eyes were shining brightly. He grabbed Bailey Fengming's sleeve through the car window. "Wu Qiuzao. It's true that a newborn calf is not afraid of tigers. But they are afraid." Bailey Fengming lowered his eyes slightly and looked along the little paws on his sleeves, and saw King Xin's chubby little face. Their eyes met, and King Xin grinned and giggled, as if he had picked up some treasure. Bailey Fengming looked at the familiar Wen and asked softly, "Is this Ayao's sister?" The wet nurse was so frightened that she couldn't even make a sound. It took a long time before she nodded in panic. Wu Qiuzao said quickly, "The prince said that this is the crown prince's sister. The child is too young and ignorant. If it disturbs His Highness, I beg your Highness to forgive me." Wu Qiuzao said, grabbing King Xin's hand and pulling it down. Xian's little hands were like pliers, tightly welded to Bailey Fengming's sleeves. Wu Qiuzao pulled it several times, but he didn't pull it off. Seeing this, Wu Qiuzao and the nanny were so frightened that their faces turned even paler. Seeing this, Bailey Fengming smiled and said, "It's okay, I'll just carry her to find Ayao." King Xin saw Bailey Fengming reaching into the car window and babbling happily non-stop. After falling into Bailey Fengming's arms, her whole body was hanging on Bailey Fengming's body. Wu Qiuzao and the wet nurse looked at the chubby hands tightly hugging His Highness the Crown Prince's neck and really wanted to cover their faces. Everyone at the gate of the city just stared with wide eyes. His Highness the Crown Prince had picked up a pink and tender little baby from nowhere. The slender neck was even more shiny, and he didn't know how much saliva had been rubbed on it. It was a coincidence that Bailey Rongs was coming on horseback just at this moment. Seeing this scene, Bailey Rongs tightened the horse's rope and stopped in front of Bailey Fengming. "Where did this little baby come from? It looks very happy." Bailey Rongs looked at the little face that was very similar to Fan Kinjao and asked knowingly. Bailey Fengming hugged King Xin tightly in his arms, and did not expose her. He just smiled and said, "Ayao's sister, the little one is probably not used to leaving her mother to go out. I just want to send her to Ayao's place." Bailey Rongs heard this name called Ayao very dull, but of course he would not show it in front of outsiders. He just paused and said with regret, "Speaking of which, Your Highness the Prince hugs me. It is indeed against the rules to parade such a little baby around the market, but if you think about it carefully, it is excusable. Although the father granted the marriage early, it is a pity that His Highness the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess have not yet consummated their marriage. It is a pity that now I can use the princess's sister to make up for the pain of missing my child. The other people sitting in the carriage heard this and their hearts skipped a beat. Why haven't the prince and the princess married yet? Of course His Highness the Crown Prince delayed it until now because of the original war. Although there is nothing wrong with what His Highness the Crown Prince did. After all, as one is in a high position, one should put the common people of the world first, but now that His Highness the Third Prince says it so openly, it is still a bit heartbreaking. After all, no woman wants to be dragged off again and again by her husband. Moreover, if you look carefully, the only person left in the royal family who has not yet married is the Crown Prince. Fan Kinjao sat in the carriage, listening to Bailey Rong's voice, and frowned in disgust. Although this method of sowing discord was disgusting, it was the best way to separate the two people. After 2 lifetimes, Bailey Rongs is still used to these backstabbing skills. As expected, a thief cannot stop stealing. If you are a dog, you cannot change your habit of eating shit. If she hadn't known Bailey Fengming's reason for delaying the wedding with her early on, and if she hadn't secretly agreed to postpone the wedding, now she would probably have a gap in her heart towards Bailey Fengming. But now Fan Kinjao knows everything, and naturally he will not be instigated by Bailey Rongs. However, when he thinks of Bailey Rongs pretending to be innocent, but full of dirty thoughts, he is still a little disgusting. On horseback, Bailey Fengming was calm. After hearing Bailey Rong's words, Shi Shiren smiled and said, "It's better than nothing." Bailey Rong's face changed. Bailey Fengming hadn't finished his words yet. Brother Three Emperors just likes to worry about others so much that he neglects himself. In my opinion, Brother Three Emperors have been married for so long, and there are many wives and concubines in the mansion. You should produce heirs as early as possible. The people sitting in the carriage. These words hurt my heart. Who doesn't know that it is difficult for the third prince to have an heir? No matter whether it is the main wife or the aunt, no baby born safely. Now the 3 princes and concubines have all changed, but what is the result? There was still no movement at all. Bailey Rongs kicked the steel plate, and his face naturally didn't look good. However, under the gaze of everyone in front of the city gate, there was no way he could break his face first. Instead, he suppressed his anger and pretended he was so magnanimous that he made way for Bailey Fengming. Just when Bailey Fengming passed by King Xin with his arms in his arms, Bailey Rong suddenly stretched out his hand towards King Xin, hoping to break the embarrassment with King Xin. If this matter were done by someone else, I'm afraid that even if I don't want to in my heart, I still have to give some face to the third prince, but King Xin is just a doll who can't even say much. If you like it, you like it, and if you don't like it, you will. I won't even look at it twice. Now facing Bailey Rong's stretched out hand, the little guy barely even hesitated. He just stuffed his head into Bailey Fengming's chest, leaving Bailey Rongs with the round back of his head. Nai's hung made a humming sound. Bailey Rongs. It feels a little awkward now. Bailey Fengming saw this and said with a smile, "Children are not sensible. Brother Three Emperors, please don't be surprised. The prince is serious, how can I argue with someone who doesn't even understand human affairs?" Bailey Rongs took the opportunity to retract his hand and said with a half smile. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 962. Chapter 962. Who did this follow? Soon, the sound of horse hooves sounded next to Fan Kinjao's carriage. Fan Kinjao took advantage of the situation and lifted the curtain, and saw Bailey Fengming holding the horse rope with one hand and holding King Xin with the other. His slender body was sitting on the horse as straight as a green pine. He was burying his head in Bailey Fengming's arms, nibbling on his clothes with joy. He seemed to have noticed something, and he quietly poked his little head out and looked behind him. When he saw his sister, his eyes were filled with excitement. It started to light up. Why should I reject Bailey Wrong's arrogance just now? Yeah, yeah, yeah. King Xin opened her little paws and asked her sister to hug her. Seeing this, Bailey Fengming bent down and handed his love towards the car window. Just as he wanted to be hugged by his sister, he seemed to notice that the warm chest behind him was gradually leaving him, and his fat little paw suddenly grabbed the snow-white clothes reluctantly. His dark eyes kept turning, looking at my sister in front of me, and then at Bailey Fengming next to me. After struggling for a long time, I reached out my hand to my sister again. But just when Fan Qinjiao was about to hug her over, King Xin kissed Bailey Fengming on the cheek. Bah! A clear and loud sound. Fan Qinjiao. Who did this follow? Bailey Fengming looked at the infatuated face, but smiled with a crooked eyebrow. In the carriage, the dim candlelight cast a faint warmth on Bailey Fengming's narrow eyebrows. The moon-curved eyebrows seemed to add a touch of tenderness to the night behind him. Cao Lishan on the side looked at the scene infatuatedly, and she even forgot to come back to her senses. I hope you can do the same. Bailey Fengming saw what Fan Qinjiao was thinking and said with a low smile. Fan Qinjiao really didn't want to waste time arguing with him on this issue, so he lowered his head and hugged King Xin back into his arms, for fear that this little thing would do something even more uncontrollable. Bailey Fengming saw that Fan Qinjiao didn't speak, and he didn't continue to speak. Just when he retracted his arm, the fingers with clear joints brushed Fan Qinjiao's cheek intentionally or unintentionally. Itchy. Fan Qinjiao. Taking advantage of her is really becoming more and more upright. Waiting until Bailey Fengming's figure disappeared outside the car window, Fan Qinjiao closed the car window. The love in his arms stopped instantly without the temptation of the beautiful man, and he and Fan Qinjiao played again for a while. Just curled up into a small ball and closed his eyes sleepily. Fan Qinjiao was worried that King Xin would catch a cold if she fell asleep like this. Just as she was thinking about it, she saw a small blanket being handed over to her. After Cao Lishan gently covered King Xin's body with a blanket, she looked at Fan Qinjiao and smiled. I didn't expect His Highness to be so approachable. It really scared me to death just now. Fan Qinjiao patted King Xin in his arms and said softly, no matter who you are, it is impossible to argue with a child. A flash of disappointment flashed in Cao Lishan's eyes. She probably didn't expect Fan Qinjiao to deal with her with just one sentence, so she had no choice but to close her mouth. Fan Qinjiao didn't even look at the expression of Cao Lishan beside him. He was just worried about whether King Xin could adapt to the life without his mother. Fortunately, King Xin slept soundly during the rest of the journey, but the wet nurse and Wu Qiuzhao were worried that King Xin would cry when she woke up halfway. They had tossing back and forth between the two carriages countless times along the way, and finally seeing that King Xin really fell asleep, I felt completely at ease. Because they were worried about arriving at the palace on the 15th, the journey was very fast. Except for stopping in the middle of the night so that everyone could go to the nearby woods for a while, the team was always in a hurry. Fan Qinjiao was worried that King Xin would not be able to adapt to the unfamiliar environment in the carriage when she woke up suddenly, so he held her little one and leaned against the couch with his eyes closed and his eyes narrowed. I didn't expect that this little thing could really sleep. It wasn't until dawn broke in the sky that he opened his eyes. He stretched out his fat paws and babbling non-stop. I guess he was hungry. Fan Qinjiao quickly called the wet nurse over and fed King Xin, and then the little thing fell asleep again. Seeing this, Fan Qinjiao quickly closed his eyes. Cao Lishan watched quietly from the side the whole time, recalling that when she was in her mansion, she had many sisters and brothers, but she had never seen anyone treat any of her younger brothers and sisters so sincerely. In a place like Cao's house, the big ones suppress the small ones. Even her mother said that people live for themselves all their lives, so who would treat anyone sincerely? Just as he was thinking about it, the carriage door suddenly opened. When Caolishan came to her senses, she saw His Royal Highness bending down and walking into the carriage. See the prince. Caolishan knelt on the ground in panic and wanted to salute and say hello. But after she knelt on the ground, she realized that she didn't even know how to say hello. Bailey Fengming waved his hand, signaling Caolishan to get up, and then walked towards Fan Kinjao. At this time, Fan Kinjao was sleeping soundly with Kingzin in his arms. The big one and the small one hugged each other and curled up into a ball. As the carriage swayed, Fan Kinjao's body was about to slip to the ground. At the critical moment, Bailey Fengming stretched out his long arms and hugged her. Calculating that there was still some time before arriving at the palace, he simply sat next to her and gently pressed her head on his shoulder. Originally thought that she would be too much to bear on such a journey, but it was difficult for him to rush over to see her as soon as he heard that his father was asleep. But now it seems that he is too worried. Caolishan looked at His Highness the Crown Prince, who was so close, and always felt that she should say something. But now her heart was beating so fast that she had difficulty breathing. She tried several times to open her mouth, but no sound came out at all. "Are you Ayao's cousin?" Bailey Fengming suddenly asked. Caolishan nodded quickly, but still couldn't make any sound. "We will arrive at the palace in 2 hours. When Ayao wakes up, there is no need to tell her that I have been here. If Ayao knew about it, I would probably worry that he would be unable to bear the tossing and tossing around." Bailey Fengming took out his arm and gently placed the sleeping Fan Kinjao on the soft innermost part. In order to prevent her from sliding to the ground again, he placed a pillow beside her. After everything was done, he got up and left. Caolishan just knelt on the ground and watched Bailey Fengming get out of the carriage. She waited until Bailey Fengming's figure completely disappeared from the door of the carriage before she slumped down on the carriage as if she had lost all her strength. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 963. Chapter 963. Not completely sure. Just after 10 hour, the team that had been traveling all night finally arrived at the palace. Fan Kinjao woke up in a daze while holding Kingzin in his arms. Through the car window, he could just see the bustling market at the foot of the palace. Snow-white smoke shrouded the entire market, and he could vaguely see the busy and fulfilling people in the town. Back view. As the team slowly drove up the mountain, the hustle and bustle of the town was gradually forgotten behind them. The palace was no different from when it came before, standing on the top of the mountain isolated from the world. The palace residents had received the news early in the morning, and now they were all standing neatly at the door waiting. The carriage of the emperor and the empress drove directly into the palace. The princes were summoned by the emperor and went to the emperor's palace to discuss matters. Others had to get off at the door and then follow the palace people waiting at the door to go everywhere. Patio. After a bumpy night, everyone was a little exhausted and didn't even have the energy to say hello. They hurriedly followed the palace guests in the direction of their own courtyards. Crown Princess, this servant is from the Queen's palace. Following the Queen's order, I specially took the Crown Princess to the Queen Pavilion, which is right next to the Queen's palace. A maid walked up to Fan Kinjao and said. Fan Kinjao did not expect that the Empress had even arranged her place of stay in advance, so he quickly called Wu Qiuzhao and the nanny to go together. Wu Qiuzhao did not expect that he would be able to live next to the Empress as soon as he came to the palace. Although he was still somewhat stressed and uncomfortable, he also knew that the Empress really cared about his sister-in-law. Only then can the palace officials be specially sent to make arrangements. Although the Jade Pavilion is not as spacious and grand as the Empress's palace, it also has an exquisite courtyard. There are man-made gardens and fish ponds in the courtyards with 3 entrances and 3 exits. Even the accompanying nanny has her own separate courtyard, so there is no need to crowd with the masters. Together. Fan Kinjao had just entered the main room and sat down when the nanny walked in with Kingzin in her arms. The little guy looked full after eating and drinking, and burped with the aroma of milk. Fan Kinjao thought that his sister-in-law would have to do some simple cleaning, so he looked at the nanny and said, "The sunshine in this house is perfect, so go and bring brother Ren over to bask in the sun together." The wet nurse nodded quickly and walked out in a hurry. Fan Kinjao put his heart on the Arhat bed by the window. The little guy was rolling around on it, and brother Ren walked in a decent manner. Little Aunt brother Ren walked up to Fan Kinjao and called her respectfully. "Our brother Ren is really sensible." Fan Kinjao smiled and touched brother Ren's head, then reached out and hugged him. Although brother Ren is young, he has been taught by his father that men should be responsible all day long. Now that his little aunt is holding him in his arms, his face turns red for a while. Kingzin is extremely excited when he sees someone coming to play with him. Crawled over and grabbed Rengir's clothes and wouldn't let go. Fan Kinjao took advantage of the time when brother Ren and Kingzin were playing around, and came to the courtyard on purpose. He called the few palace servants serving here to him. Now he had a group of little ones with him. People of course cannot be careless. Fortunately, the Empress has already thought of this, and the palace servants in this courtyard now all used to serve at the Empress Palace. To put it bluntly, they are all the Queen's people. When Han Jingchen brought her son in, she saw Fan Kinjao carefully explaining the affairs of the palace. She thought she was the only one who was tired of raising a child, but she didn't expect that everyone was like this, even Fan Kinjao. People who have never given birth to children are so busy, and her heart instantly felt balanced. "How long are you going to stand at the door and laugh?" Fan Kinjao finished explaining the matter and then turned back to look at Han Jingchen. "Aren't we afraid that it will delay your business?" Han Jingchen came over with her son. Han Jingchen's son is much older than Rengir and Kingzin. Now he can walk very steadily. Standing in front of Fan Kinjao, he can clearly say hello. Yunjin greets the crown princess. Fan Kinjao responded and quickly led the people into the house. "Let's play with them." Yunjin glanced at his mother behind him, saw her mother nodded, and then obediently took off her clothes. "Shoes, first put them neatly, and then put them up." Fan Kinjao asked the palace attendants to bring a pot of tea and some snacks. He sat on the chair opposite Han Jingchen and looked at the group of little things playing on the Luhan bed. He finally felt that he could relax for a while. Fan Kinjao thought about what Yunjin had just called himself, looked at Han Jingchen and asked, "The name given by the emperor?" If I remember correctly, the last time she visited the 6th prince, Yunjin didn't have a name yet. Han Jingchen picked up the teacup and took a sip and said, "Ever since I gave birth to Yunjin, I have kept her in the palace for cultivation. I have never brought her into the palace. The emperor has neglected her for a long time. I brought her here a few days ago when Yunjin entered the palace to pay his respects to the queen." The queen mentioned the name. Unexpectedly, someone from the Ministry of Internal Affairs came to give the name that night. Even if the 6th prince is a little transparent, Han Jingchen is the eldest grandson of the emperor. How can he forget it? Han Jingchen said this, just to see through it but not to tell it. Fan Kinjao glanced at the few little things that were already playing together, and then said in a low voice, "I came to the palace in such a hurry this time. I saw that the yard and the house were packed up in a hurry. It can be seen that the palace has just received the news. Please remember to be extremely careful when you have children around you." She just calculated that during this period, Bailey Rongs would definitely kidnap the child and continue to refine the elixir, but it was not yet known which child Bailey Rongs was targeting. "Since we can't alert the snake in the grass, we must be more careful and cautious." Han Jingchen clenched the teacup in her hand tightly, saying she was not afraid would be a lie. "I really don't know what the 3rd prince is thinking. He can even do such a heartbreaking thing. Is he really not afraid of God's punishment? Compared with the divine punishment, the chair is something more within reach. Judging from the current situation, the third prince has already grasped the king's heart if this continues. Who knows whether the emperor was really confused and asked Bailey Wrongs to replace plums with peaches. Han Jingchen saw Fan Qingjiao's expression unchanged, and quickly held her hand and said, "Fortunately, we still have time. Don't worry, Qingjiao, I will definitely stand by your side, no matter where and when." Fan Qingjiao's heart tightened. Even she was not 100% sure about this battle. If this matter really fails, you and the sixth prince will not be involved. Don't worry, I have already thought of a way out for you. Han Jingchen held Fan Qingjiao's hand tighter. "Qingjiao, you know I'm not afraid." Fan Qingjiao smiled slowly. "You're not afraid, but you still have a son to raise. Do you also hope that Yunjin will be like Yunyu? Yunyu is still a princess, but without her mother and concubine, there is always something missing. Even if she is the empress, no matter how much I pity her, she is not my biological mother after all." Han Jingchen didn't think about it that much. Anyway, she knew that even if something happened to her, her mother's family would not be able to leave Yunjin alone. She just couldn't bear to watch her best friend resist everything. Over the bed, bursts of laughter suddenly came. Fan Qingjiao and Han Jingchen followed the sound and saw a few little things laughing together. Looking at them, Fan Qingjiao and Han Jingchen's tense hearts finally calmed down. It's too early to say what's going on. Since this road has to be taken once and for all, and the outcome can only be known at the end, what's the use of being so entangled now? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 964. Chapter 964, Be more careful. When the two of them came back to their senses, no one wanted to continue the heavy topic just now. Instead, Han Jingchen seemed to have thought of something. "Guess who I met when I just came here?" Fan Qingjiao raised his eyebrows. There were so many people visiting the palace this time. If he really wanted to guess, he would probably have to guess forever. Han Jingchen did not sell the lawsuit and lowered her voice. "That Aunt Fan from the third prince's residence." Fan Qingjiao. This is really unexpected. I didn't expect that Aunt Fan would succeed in the end. After all, coming to the palace to celebrate the festival does not have as many rules as having a banquet in the palace. Even if the third prince brought an aunt over, no one would say anything. When I came just now, I saw Aunt Fan's grandfather came to visit Aunt Fan, and the one who is probably most upset right now is the newly married third prince's concubine. The third prince just brought a concubine through the city in a showy way, but the concubine's family actually paid a public visit under the eyes of the third prince's concubine. This clearly meant that the third prince's concubine was not taken seriously. Fan Qingjiao couldn't laugh when he heard this. The journey to the palace was bumpy, but she didn't notice that even Fan Zixia came with her. If Bailey Wrongs only brought Fan Swinning here because he was partial to Fan Swinning, then it would be too ostentatious to openly bring Fan Zixia to the palace. No matter what Guan Pan'er is, as long as he can sit in the position of the third prince's concubine, he has given concubine Yu's favor. Bailey Wrongs is so bright that he doesn't care about Guan Pan'er's face. Could it be that concubine Yu's face will it look better? If you really anger concubine Yu, the first person to suffer bad consequences will be Fan Swinning. How could a smart person like Fan Swinning not know that those who do evil will inevitably die? I heard that as soon as the third prince's concubine arrived at the palace, she went to pay her respects to concubine Yu. I must say that she went to complain, Han Jingchen said with a smile. Such jokes do not happen every year. Don't look too closely at the third prince's concubine. The third prince's concubine is too domineering. If you really find out something and act arrogantly in public, no one will look good, Fan Qingjiao warned. Han Jingchen nodded, knowing that Fan Qingjiao was worried about her. With the temperament of the third prince's concubine, anyone would be unlucky to meet her. Han Jingchen originally planned to come and sit for a while, but she didn't expect that the sitting would last for an hour. Finally, someone from the courtyard came to announce that the crown prince was here, so Han Jingchen got up and left with her son. As soon as Han Jingchen left the house, Bailey Fengming walked in. He was still wearing the same clothes he had worn on the road. It could be seen that he came here directly after leaving the emperor's side. "Why are you here?" Fan Qinjiao stood up and asked. Bailey Fengming smiled faintly and said, "Originally I was going to pay my respects to the queen. Now the queen is taking a nap, so I came to sit with you to save you the trouble of going back and forth for a while." As the prince, Bailey Fengming lived in the palace closest to the emperor, so it would take at least half an hour to go back and forth. Upon seeing this, Fan Qinjiao hurried out of the door. It was Lin Yi who was guarding the door when he saw Fan Qinjiao walking out. He quickly stepped forward and saluted, "I see the crown princess. Go to the prince's palace and get some clean clothes." Fan Qinjiao calculated that since she is close to the queen, she might as well prepare a few more sets of clothes for Bailey Fengming, which would also save him money. Running back and forth, at least when I come to pay my respects to the queen in the future, I can come to her for a nap. Lin Yi didn't expect to be able to do this. As expected, the princess was the most attentive, and she quickly went back to get the clothes herself. Fan Qinjiao called another palace servant. "His Royal Highness will stay for dinner, so let the small kitchen start preparing now." The palace man nodded quickly and said, "Yes, I will do it now." In the room, Brother Ren was bowing respectfully and saying, "I have met His Highness the Crown Prince." "No need to be polite." Bailey Fengming smiled and touched Brother Ren's head. But when he took his hand back, he suddenly found that his sleeves were a lot heavier. When he looked down, he saw that King Xin was already hanging on him. On the arm. As soon as King Xin saw Bailey Fengming, her eyes lit up. She was holding Bailey Fengming's arm like she was holding a rare treasure. How could she be willing to let go? When Fan Qinjiao entered the door, he saw Bailey Fengming already sitting on the sofa, and King Xin climbed onto Bailey Fengming's lap as he wished, and was playing with the long hair hanging down his waist. After all, Ren Gear was older than King Xin and knew more things than King Xin. Faced with such an exciting scene in front of him, he stood in a daze. Fan Qinjiao was really worried about irritating Brother Ren, so he walked over and hugged King Xin in his arms. Then he found the nanny and sent the two children to Wu Kaiozhuo's yard first. By the time everyone here was done with their work, the palace servants over there had already put lunch on the table, and Lin Yi also took the clothes over and placed them on the sofa beside him. Bailey Fengming and Fan Qinjiao washed their hands together, then sat at the round table and began to eat. After running around all night, their stomachs were already empty. Now they finally had something warm to eat, and their whole bodies felt like much more comfortable. Although Fan Qinjiao despised eating and sleeping silently, he really didn't want to disturb Bailey Fengming at this time. He waited until he had almost eaten before saying, "I thought you would be left in the emperor's palace have a meal." Bailey Fengming shook his head. "Father sent us here and just proposed a competition in a few days." "What competition?" "Shooting on horseback." Fan Qinjiao tightened his grip on the chopsticks in his hand and instantly lost his appetite. Bailey Fengming has been frail and sick since he was a child. This is something everyone knows, but the emperor suddenly asked Bailey Fengming to participate in the riding and shooting competition. Did he really not take him to heart, or did he sense something? "There's no need to worry, it's just that the brothers are having fun together," Bailey Fengming said lightly. "In fact, it doesn't matter whether he is tempted or not. As long as he restrains his sharpness, there will be no flaws." Fan Qinjiao asked, "The third prince is also participating?" Bailey Fengming nodded, "Yes, yes." Hearing this, Fan Qinjiao couldn't tell whether he should continue to worry or breathe a sigh of relief. "Although I know what medicine is sold in the gourd over there, I don't know when or how they will do it. No matter what, this time you have to be more careful when riding and shooting. Even if the emperor has no intention of testing, who can guarantee that Bailey Rongs will not take the opportunity to make some small moves? Fan Kinjao really didn't dare to relax at all about Bailey Rongs. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 965. Chapter 965 The Crown Princess is worthy. Bailey Fengming smiled and nodded, finally agreeing. After dinner, there was still no movement in the Queen's palace. Fan Kinjao simply entered the back room, intending to clear the bed first and let Bailey Fengming take a nap. Unexpectedly, before she could reach out her hand, she was picked up by a pair of arms. By the time Fan Kinjao came to his senses, Bailey Fengming had already placed him on the pillow. As his legs sank, he saw that a certain shameless prince was already pillowing him on him. Bailey Fengming said softly, "When the queen wakes up, I'm afraid you will have to come with me to pay my respects. If your clothes are messed up, you will have to freshen them up and change them. Is this why you reluctantly sleep on my lap?" Fan Kinjao. "Oh, I also have to thank you." Bailey Fengming looked at Fan Kinjao's eyes that wanted to punch someone, and smiled softly. He was probably really exhausted. After a while, he saw that the long eyelashes trembled and finally covered his face. He stared at those dark eyes. The room also became quiet. Fan Kinjao just looked at his exquisite facial features quietly, and his whole heart felt very at ease. Unknowingly, he just fell asleep leaning on the soft bed. When she regained consciousness again, she noticed something gently scratching her cheek. Fan Kinjao opened her eyes and ran into Bailey Fengming's bottomless black eyes. He smiled slightly, took back the hand that was lingering on her cheek, and said softly, "Are you awake?" Fan Kinjao looked out the window and saw that the sky outside was getting dark. "What time is it?" Bailey Fengming said softly, "Shenqi has just passed." Fan Kinjao was stunned and fell asleep for more than an hour without realizing it. As they were talking in the room, the voice of a palace attendant from the Queen's palace came outside to announce, "Your Highness, Crown Princess, the Queen has woken up." Fan Kinjao was now the Queen's daughter-in-law, so she had to go to pay her respects as soon as possible. He quickly got up, and then realized that he had fallen asleep in Bailey Fengming's arms without knowing when, and his whole back they were all leaning on his strong chest. No wonder she was wondering just now why she didn't feel any pain in her body. "I know, you go down first." Bailey Fengming dismissed the palace servant who came to deliver the message without haste, and then stood up first, but he did not leave immediately, but took Fan Kinjao's shoes. Got up. Just at this time, the palace servants who came to serve came in, and happened to see His Highness the Crown Prince holding the Crown Princess's feet in one hand and the Crown Princess's shoes in the other. "I can do it myself." When Fan Kinjao saw this, he quickly wanted to pull his foot back. Even if he knew that these palace people were all the Queen's wife, it was really against the rules. "Don't move." Bailey Fengming didn't take it seriously. He held Fan Kinjao's foot and gently put it into the shoe. He adjusted it carefully before switching to the other foot. The people in the palace looked down and did not dare to look further. The shock in their hearts was already beyond description in words. Slaves like them who serve in the palace have to welcome the emperor and his concubines, ministers, and family members to visit the palace several times every year. But whether it is the relationship between the emperor and the ladies of the palace, or the relationship between the adults and their families, no matter how loving they are, they cannot reach this level. After all, no man wants to commit himself to a woman. But now, His Highness the Crown Prince has indeed done something that even ordinary men would not bother to do. And do it willingly. "Wait for me here." Obediently, Bailey Fengming raised his cheeks slightly, and a faint smile appeared on his handsome cheeks. Then he stood up and changed his clothes surrounded by the palace people. Fan Kinjao thought that he really didn't have anything to clean up, so he just sat on the couch and didn't move. I didn't expect this scene, but I happened to be bumped into by Caolishan, who entered the yard. Even through the window, Caolishan could imagine the tenderness and sweetness on the prince's expression when he bent over. "Who are you?" Lin Yi, who was guarding the door, came over and asked. Caolishan quickly came back to her senses and said, I am cousin Kinjao's cousin." When Lin Yi heard that she was the younger sister of the crown princess, the stern look on her face obviously reduced a little. "His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is changing inside now. It's not convenient for you to go in." "What's the matter?" "Wait for the Crown Princess and your Highness to go and pay greetings to the Queen. Let's talk about it later." I have nothing to do. I just wanted to come and talk to cousin Kinjao. I didn't expect that. As soon as I entered the yard, I saw His Royal Highness putting on cousin Kinjao's shoes." Caolishan's voice became lower and lower as he spoke, as if he really bumped into her. "Nothing extraordinary." Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't think there was anything wrong. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has always loved the Crown Princess. This is known to everyone. However, the two masters have not been married yet. You should not mention such things to outsiders to avoid causing trouble. Unnecessary words. Caolishan looked at Lin Yi in shock. "Isn't this person from His Highness the Crown Prince?" Why, after knowing that His Highness the Crown Prince had done such a humble thing, not only did he not intend to blame Fan Kinjao, but he was still helping Fan Kinjao. "I didn't expect this guard brother to be so reasonable," Caolishan said with a smile. "It's not me who is reasonable, but the Crown Princess who deserves it." Lin Yuru said this, but Caolishan didn't understand. After leaving the yard, Caolishan quietly slipped out of the back door, explored the yard where Fan Swinning was, and waited at the back door. Not long after, he saw the maid beside Fan Swinning escorting Fan Zixio out of the front door. The maid was a sharp-eyed person. When she turned around, she saw Caolishan hiding at the back door. After returning, she informed Fan Swinning of the matter. "You're already here, please come in," Fan Swinning said calmly. "Yes." The maid took the order and went out, and soon Caolishan was brought in. "Sister Swinning." Caolishan greeted her with a respectful salute. Fan Swinning stood up in person, took Caolishan's hand and sat down together on the cave, then smiled and said, "We haven't seen you for a long time, and my sister's complexion is much better than when we first met. Speaking of which, I haven't congratulated my sister on her success stay at Hua's house. If it weren't for Sister Swinning's advice, I wouldn't be as comfortable as I am today." Caolishan lowered her head and said. Fan Swinning noticed the ambiguity in Caolishan's eyes. She turned her eyebrows and then said with a smile, "Sister, when you come here today, you don't just want to thank me, right? If you have anything to do, just tell me. If I can help, I will definitely give it to you." My sister helped me. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 966. Chapter 966. No emperor can favor him alone. Caolishan bit her lip and told her about seeing His Royal Highness putting on Fan Kinjao's shoes. She thought that as long as she stayed in the Hua family, she would always have the opportunity to come into contact with His Highness the Crown Prince, but now His Highness the Crown Prince was clearly so close, but she would never be able to touch him. Fan Swinning originally wanted to make some insinuations about Caolishan's intolerance. After just a short time, she wanted to climb up to the prince's high branch, but she didn't expect to hear what she least wanted to hear. Thinking about how much she has done for the third prince, it is lucky that the third prince can still remember her in his heart, but what has Fan Kinjao done, and why can the prince do this? Caolishan's face doesn't look good now, and Fan Swinning's face naturally doesn't look much better either. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I really wouldn't have imagined that such a high-ranking person would do this for another person. Sister Swinning, you said that the prince loves cousin Kinjeo so much, do I still have a chance? Caolishan. He looked at Fan Swinning in confusion. Fan Swinning took a deep breath, suppressed the jealousy in her heart, and then took Caolishan's hand and said, what my sister said is childish. The prince is a prince, or even the future emperor. How can a man of that status be alone? How about pampering someone? Caolishan thought for a while and said, Sister Swinning means, even if there isn't me, there will be other women. It's natural. Not to mention that there is no man in this world who can really do it from beginning to end. Even if the prince really has such a heart, the royal family will not allow it, Fan Swinning said with a smile. But what should I do to say a few words to His Highness the Crown Prince? Caolishan's eyes that had just brightened a little suddenly dimmed again. Since arriving at the palace, she has indeed had more opportunities to see the prince, but so what? His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has never had her in his eyes. If you want to catch a man, you have to rely on your ability. If you only hope to be seen by others, how long will it take? Fan Swinning reminded. Think about it carefully, what are the preferences of His Royal Highness? Caolishan really thought about it carefully, and after a long while she said, I didn't notice anything else, but His Highness the Crown Prince seemed to be very good to cousin Kinjeo's sister. No matter how unruly he was, His Highness the Crown Prince did not a scolding. Fan Swinning laughed when she heard this, got up and walked to her back room, took out a handkerchief from the bottom layer of a row of small cabinets on the bed, and then walked back. Caolishan looked at the handkerchief in Fan Swinning's hand and was stunned. Sister Swinning, this is... Didn't you say that His Highness the Crown Prince pities Ching Xian? If that's the case, you can use this veil to ask Ching Xian to befriend you as long as Ching Xian is willing to stick to you. Are you afraid that you won't have a chance to talk to His Highness the Crown Prince? Fan Swinning said with a sneer. This veil is really so powerful. Isn't it just an ordinary veil? Caolishan looked at the veil carefully, but didn't see any clues. This handkerchief has been soaked in a special potion. Children's senses are the most sensitive. As long as King Xin smells the smell, he will slowly become addicted to it. You only need to quietly sew this handkerchief into the clothes you wear every day. That's it. Fan Swinning gently placed the handkerchief on Caolishan's hand. Caolishan actually didn't believe that a veil could really do this, but as long as Fan Swinning was willing to help her, it would be good. Remember, this veil must be carefully hidden inside your clothes. No matter how tempted you are, it's fine, but you must not walk around in front of Fan Kinjeo wearing that clothes. Even Princess Yunyu had to respect Fan Kinjeo's medical skills. The reason why she lost to Fan Kinjeo several times before was because she underestimated Fan Kinjeo. But luckily, God was wise and allowed her to bump into Caolishan. Fan Swinning gave Caolishan a few more careful words, and then asked someone to send Caolishan away through the back door. After the palace attendant sent the person away, he came back and said, I heard that the relationship between this cousin and the crown princess is not very close. It's because Aunt Fan is so kind to others that she is willing to accompany her and talk so much. Be sure not to tell anyone what happened today. Fan Swinning took out a few grains of silver and gave them to the palace maid, then sent her away. Now everyone is staring at immortality, thinking that as long as they grasp the emperor's mind, they can control everything. But if Fan Swinning remembered correctly, the emperor did not find any formula for immortality at all in the dream, and it seemed that he would be seriously ill in a short time. Fan Swinning calculated that although what happened now was not exactly the same as the scene in the dream, most of the time and place matched. And she was using Caolishan now to prevent the emperor from really being like in the dream. Seriously ill and comatose. Once the emperor falls into a coma, the court must elect the prince to take charge of the affairs. When that time comes, even the third prince will not have the right to intervene, but she can let Caolishan carve up the prince's feelings. If the prince is willing, then soon Fan Kinjao will repeat the bad luck of being abandoned again, just like in a dream. If the prince is unwilling, she can ask the third prince to suggest that the prince take a concubine. Since the prince is unwilling to give up Fan Kinjao, he will inevitably give up the position that is easily available to him. After all, no minister can allow his emperor to be the only one favored. Even if the prince can really give up everything for Fan Kinjao in the end, so what if the miserable Mandarin duck who doesn't even have an identity will eventually fall back into the hands of the third prince and her, and be slaughtered by them? Fan Xuning was thinking happily here, while Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming had already arrived at the Queen's palace. After the bumpy journey last night, even after sleeping all afternoon today, Queen Zhen 11 still looked tired. But when she saw Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming, she put on a smile and waved. I originally planned to take a nap, but I didn't expect that more than 2 hours would pass by just closing and opening my eyes. Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming paid their respects to the Queen, then took the initiative to walk to the Queen's side and put his hand on her wrist. Seeing this, Empress Zhen 11 smiled and said, I used to think that when Fengming got married, someone would be able to take care of him, but I didn't expect that now I am taking advantage of him. It is a blessing for a daughter-in-law to serve her mother, Fan Kinjao said calmly. The Queen's pulse was relatively stable, but the pulse was a little high and long, probably due to fatigue from the journey. Although it was not a serious illness, Fan Kinjao still called Lily over and carefully prescribed a prescription for Lily to go to the palace doctor. I felt relieved after I took the medicine. When Fan Kinjao sat back on the chair, Bailey Fengming just handed the teacup over. Fan Kinjao took it naturally and took a sip. It was just warm. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 967. Chapter 967, Palace Reunion. Queen Zhen 11 looked at this scene, her eyes were filled with laughter. Her son and daughter-in-law had a good relationship, and she, as a mother, was the happiest. It would be great if the fifth child could also make her worry-free like this. When thinking of the fifth prince, the smile on Queen Zhen 11's face faded a little. After the incident with Zhao Yi last time, although it didn't seem to cause much trouble, the emperor made a few insinuations and tests. Fan Kinjao frowned. He couldn't say he was too surprised, he could only say it was reasonable and unexpected. The last incident involving Zhao Yi was clearly that concubine Yu wanted to use Zhao Yi to find out whether the fifth prince had woken up. Although the matter was handled in time, concubine Yu was worried that the queen would cause trouble, so it was understandable that she explained the matter to the emperor in advance. In the final analysis, the third prince is now helping the emperor to make elixirs and make medicines. As long as concubine Yu talks a little more sweetly, she can make the emperor favor the third prince in this matter. Mother, do you want us to behave more casually? Bailey Fengming said lightly. Since we have all arrived at the palace, you can have fun as you please. I have already spread the word and gathered the other princes and concubines together. Empress Zhen 11 nodded and said, and now the emperor is still wary. Naturally he would not let the third prince take action easily. Fan Kinjao also understood what the queen meant. Don't worry, mother, my daughter-in-law understands. Now that you understand, go back and prepare. You've come here, so why not take the opportunity to relax for a while? Empress Zhen 11 waved her hand with a smile. Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming stood up together, nodded and left. Lily waited for the person to be sent out, then turned around and returned to the palace. Unexpectedly, as soon as she entered the door, she tripped on the threshold of the door, and the beads on her head fell to the ground and shattered. Queen, please forgive me. Lily quickly knelt on the ground to apologize. Queen Zhen 11 waved her hand. You are so careless, why are you panicking? Lily lowered her head and walked to the queen's side. Her voice was very low. This slave will inevitably feel uneasy when she thinks about this time, but the queen is still calm. Lily has been with the queen for so many years, and she has seen all kinds of storms and waves. To put it bluntly, in a place like the harem, if she didn't have some skills and means, she would have been chewed to pieces without leaving any bones. But this time is different, this time it is to disobey the Holy Spirit. If something goes wrong, it will be a serious crime that will implicate the 9 tribes. It's not that I can keep my composure, it's that there is no turning back to what is before me. Empress Gen 11 smiled bitterly, in other words, there is no turning back to what is before me. She didn't want to fight at first, but what did she get? She was ignored by the emperor and oppressed by the concubines in the harem. Even her son, the current prince, was no better than a concubine born from a concubine. Recalling those years of enduring humiliation and living in the cracks, Empress Gen 11 felt her heart aching with hatred. Stability is never stolen, but must be grabbed by means. Lily, please remember that if the emperor abolishes the crown prince and establishes a crown prince, no matter how hard we try now, we will wait until the day when the new emperor ascends the throne. Will also be my death anniversary. Queen Gen 11's eyes were filled with coldness. Concubine Yu has been fighting with her for half her life, and she is the one she hates the most. Once concubine Yu's son really sits on that chair, how can she leave any way to survive? Let's talk about the third prince, who ignored the lives of other innocent people in order to please the emperor. If such a person becomes the next emperor of Ziliang, what hope is there? So, it's not that she has to fight. But it will not work without fighting. Bailey Fengming escorted Fan Qinjiao out of the queen's palace, and then went back to his own palace for the time being. After all, in a few days there would be a trial of riding and shooting. A sick man like him, who had been sick since childhood, had to sharpen his spear in battle. After Fan Qinjiao returned, he made a special trip to Wu Qiuzhuo's yard. It was Wu Qiuzhuo who was feeding Brother Ren with complimentary food and stood up quickly. "Why are you back so soon, sister-in-law?" Fan Qinjiao saw that Brother Ren had a mouthful of food, so he took out a handkerchief and wiped his mouth carefully, then stood up and said, looking at the time, "It's time for Qing to get up. I was worried about her crying, so I came over to take a look." The baby was a little uncomfortable when he just woke up. It will be fine after coaxing him. King Xin is breastfeeding at the nanny's place right now. Wu Qiuzhuo actually didn't expect that King Xin would be particularly pleasant to see Cao Lishan today. As long as Cao Lishan hugged her, she would be happy. I stopped crying, but when I thought about it again, I realized it was nothing. Children are just like that, changing their faces is like changing the sky. Fan Qinjiao walked to the window next door. Through the window, he saw King Xin happily sucking milk. Thinking that he would have a small gathering with all the princes and concubines later, he could only ask Wu Qiuzhuo to continue watching King Xin. Simply after tidying up, I got up and headed to the Feng Shui pavilion where the gathering was held. With the queen's summons, the other princes and concubines will naturally answer the call. Fan Qinjiao had just arrived, and Han Jingchen, Princess Pinglai, and the 2nd and 8th princesses all followed suit. The Feng Shui pavilion is built on a man-made rock. Sitting inside, you can just take in the scenery of the palace. Especially now that the lanterns in the palace have been lit, looking down from high up, it looks like a fire dragon winding its way, which is quite impressive. Spectacular. It's just that except for the 2nd prince and concubine, everyone else has something on their mind. Even the beautiful scenery looks dull and boring now. To sum it up, today is the reunion festival, but after the emperor gathered everyone, he had no intention of celebrating. It was the queen who made the decree to gather them together. How can Sima Zhao not make people panic with his intentions like this? Now they feel like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, waiting for the emperor to wave the butcher's knife. I heard that the fish in this pond are very fat. Why don't we let the palace officials catch a few for us to add to our meal? Fan Qinjiao suggested first. This is a good idea. In the past banquets, we didn't have the privilege of adding extra dishes, but today is different. Today we are the biggest, so we can add whatever we want, Han Jingchen said with a smile. Yan Hanbei also became interested after hearing this. That's true. At banquets in the past, we were all just accompanying each other, so who cares about life and death? Now that we are all together today, we might as well have a good time, eat, drink and have fun. The eighth princess also knew that in this situation, there was no choice at all. In this case, it was useless no matter how worried she was, so she might as well relax a little. Yan Hanbei always had the temperament to do whatever he said, so he immediately asked the palace people to go to the lake to catch fish. The second and eighth princesses asked the palace people to set up a fire. Fan Qinjiao and Han Jingchen led the palace people to the fish that had been caught and packed were put on branches and placed on the fire. The atmosphere in the Feng Shui pavilion finally relaxed, and everyone's faces gradually began to smile. What do I think it's about? Such labor and effort turns out to be just grilling a few fish. What I know is that several princes and concubines are here to cultivate their sentiments. What I don't know is that some slave without eyes is doing something daring here. Making a fire. An extremely discordant voice suddenly sounded behind everyone. Hearing the harsh sound, everyone knew who it was without turning around. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 968. Chapter 968, Throwing People Around Fan Qinjiao. Sure enough, in the silence, Lian Panner staggered in, followed by Fan Swinning, who had lowered his eyebrows and eyes, and several palace maids behind him. Today, everyone knew that it was a small gathering between the sisters-in-law, so no one brought anyone from the palace. Now that Guan Panner was surrounded by people and entered the Feng Shui pavilion, it suddenly felt a lot crowded. The third prince's concubine is really very angry, Han Jingchen said with a smile. Guan Panner fiddled with the hairpin on her temples and said with a smile, as the daughter-in-law of the royal family, I cannot be negligent in the slightest, but I have long been accustomed to this. Speaking of it, ever since I can remember, there are no fewer than 5 people serving behind me. So what if there are 50 of them? Are they still not equal to us now? Yan Hanbei wouldn't be spoiled by Guan Panner. Isn't he the founding father of the People's Republic of China who can't finish flipping through an old almanac? Guan Panner's face turned blue with anger. You. The third prince and concubine also saw it. Feng Shui Pavilion is such a big place, but now a small part of it is occupied by the third prince and concubine. Although the empress did not come in person, everyone here was summoned by the empress. If you really lose your mood, the queen will be punished, the eighth princess quickly stood up and said. Guan Panner finally heard it. Now the people here are clearly ostracizing her. But even if she knew it well, she still had to grit her teeth and drive everyone out, leaving only Fan Swinning sitting in a corner. Fan Qinjiao quietly looked at Fan Swinning, who was out of place, and saw that her face was calm, her expression was natural, and she didn't seem to feel unfair or even jealous at all. If Fan Qinjiao didn't know Fan Swinning too well, he might have been deceived by her appearance. By chance, the fish on the shelf was almost ready to be grilled at this time, and the palace people quickly put it on plates and brought them to the table. The plates of grilled fish were golden and crispy, and just looking at them made people want to eat. The princes and concubines present are all natives of the main city. They have had strict requirements on food and daily life since childhood. It is impossible for such game to be served on the table. Now they are looking at the food that is constantly exuding fragrance and heat. Grilled fish, all of them showed curious and greedy expressions. The first person to eat was Han Jingchen, then the eighth and second princes. Although Yan Hanbei had never eaten this kind of food when he was a child, he thought that when King Pinglai was demoted, he had not suffered anything, and now he had a bite of roasted rice. What are the fish afraid of? Guan Panner, who was sitting aside, naturally disdained being in the company of others, and just looked at it coldly. Don't mention it, the taste of grilling it directly over fire is indeed unmatched by other steaming, cooking and stir-frying methods, Han Jingchen said, picking up another chopstick of fish and putting it in her mouth. The eighth princess was obviously not used to eating, but she also smiled and said, the taste is indeed different. The second princess and Yan Hanbei didn't think the grilled fish was delicious, but they didn't taste it. They picked up the fish and threw it into their mouths. Seeing this, Guan Pan'er sneered and said, it's just a grilled fish, why do they all look so inexperienced? Fan Qinjiao looked at Guan Pan'er and said, so, has the third prince and concubine eaten it? Guan Pan'er hesitated for a moment, how could I have eaten such a rough thing? A true gentleman watches chess without speaking. It is better to watch others play chess without speaking, which is good education and self-cultivation. Although I don't expect that the Guan family can raise their daughter like a man, the third prince's concubine has not even tasted it. It's easy to jump to conclusions, and those who don't know think that this is what the Guan family's tutors are like. As soon as Fan Qinjiao opened his mouth, everyone else just listened with open ears. Just like now, the Guan family has all been scolded in one sentence. If Guan Pan'er continues to confront Fan Qinjiao, he may even have to dig out his ancestral graves in a while. Guan Pan'er's little face turned blue with anger. She looked at the grilled fish on the table and suddenly picked it up with chopsticks. But as soon as she threw it into her mouth, she couldn't wait to spit it out again. Bah, bah, bah. This, where is the food for people to eat? A maid standing behind hurriedly ran over. She first walked to Fan Qinjiao, knelt down and said, this maid is the maid of the third prince's concubine. The third prince's concubine is a bit difficult to get along with, but she is a good person. I also hope that the crown princess will not be as fussy as the third princess. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. They did not expect that the slaves around Guan Pan'er would admit their mistakes on behalf of their master. Fan Qinjiao looked at the person kneeling in front of him and couldn't kick him away. He waved his hand lightly and said, it's better to go see your master. The maid hurriedly got up and walked to Guan Pan'er's side. She poured a cup of tea and wanted to serve Guan Pan'er to drink it. Unexpectedly, she lost her grip and the teacup fell to the ground and splashed all over Guan Pan'er. Of water. This slave deserves to die, this slave deserves to die. The maid knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Guan Pan'er slapped her angrily, grabbed the maid's hair and said fiercely, I'll blind you. This dress of mine is very expensive, and I can't afford to pay you even if I sell it to you. The maid was in pain and fear, and big tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't mean this, please ask the third prince to go around me this time. The eighth princess frowned and looked at this scene. She always felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what was wrong for a while. Just as he was thinking about it, he heard Guan Pan'er let go of the maid's hair and said, just now I saw that you were so close to the crown princess. I'm afraid you already want to change owners. In that case, don't commit yourself to me, just follow the princess from now on. As soon as these words came out, everyone's heart skipped a beat. No matter whether Guan Pan'er said this intentionally or not, she poured a bucket of dirty water on Fan Qinjiao's body for buying other people's slaves. Although it is not a big deal, spreading it out is not good for his reputation. I don't have a slave. I really don't have a slave. I hope the third prince will spare the slave. The maid was still kneeling on the ground, crying. Guan Pan'er was completely unmoved. If the crown princess appreciates you, you have saved your life. If even the crown princess dislikes you, just find a place to kill yourself. Everybody. Isn't it just a cup of tea? As for saving your life. However, the matter has developed to this point, not only the eighth prince's concubine, but also other people present have finally come to understand. This is obviously because he wants to infiltrate Fan Qinjiao's side. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 969. Chapter 969 can only be said to be irrelevant. Nowadays, the competition between the Crown Prince and the Third Prince is fierce. This is something everyone knows, but no one expected that Guan Pan'er would use such clumsy means to squeeze his people into Fan Qingjiao's side. The method is a bit low level, but now there is only one way in front of Fan Qingjiao. Take this maid. Otherwise, once word of what happened today is spread, Fan Qingjiao will be a despicable person who refuses to save him. But even if Fan Qingjiao really takes the person in, he will definitely keep him well fed and well fed. If something happens, wouldn't it be clear that he has an opinion on the third prince's concubine? When everyone figured out the cause and effect, they were all worried about the crown princess. The third prince, my concubine, really knows that I am wrong. The maid was still kowtowing and pleading. Instead of begging me, it's better to beg your new master. Guan Pan'er snorted coldly. As if she was desperate, the maid really turned to Fan Qingjiao's direction and said sadly, although I have a humble status, I understand the principle of repaying kindness. Today the crown princess saved the slave, and tomorrow I will make a custom-made cow become a horse to repay the princess. This forced Fan Qingjiao to save him. Fan Qingjiao just watched with cold eyes as Guan Pan'er performed superbly, and couldn't help but sneered in his heart. Guan Pan'er was not stupid at all. She had just married Bailey Wrongs not long ago. He just knew how to step on her to please Bailey Wrongs. It's just a pity that I was too hasty. For what crime did the third prince want to kill this maid? Fan Qingjiao looked at Guan Pan'er and asked. Guan Pan'er's eyes rolled. He has no master, no big or small. Fan Qingjiao nodded. Oh, then let's put him to death. Guan Pan'er. You, what did you say? Hearing this, the other princes and concubines' eyes widened, and they were obviously equally frightened. Normally speaking, the crown princess should pretend to be a good person, say a few words to the maid, and then take her to her side, no matter how reluctant she is at this time. But why did she get to the crown princess? It cannot be said that they are exactly the same, it can only be said that they are completely unrelated. The third princess also said just now that the slave has no master, no big or small, and has no duty to be a slave. Even if such a person stays, he will be nothing but a disaster. Although I don't like killing, but if I can clean up the family of the third prince and concubine, it doesn't matter if I lose some of my life. Fan Qingjiao looked at Guan Pan'er calmly and said. Do you really think that if you send someone to her, she must accept it? Do not think too much. Guan Pan'er's expression changed. I just saw that this maid was chatting with the crown princess very well. Fan Qingjiao smiled and said, I am the royal daughter-in-law like the sister-in-law who is sitting here, so how can I get along with a slave? Is it possible that the third prince is not feeling well and her eyes are dim? Guan Pan'er. No, she has to be quiet. Ever since she married to the third prince's mansion, the third prince had always treated her lukewarmly and stayed in the yard of that fan swinning all day long. She also thought about it for many days before she came up with the idea of sending someone to Fan Cheng. Thoughts around Harika. Since the third prince and concubine can't do anything, why not let me do it for you? Fan Qingjiao looked at Guan Pan'er and said. When Guan Pan'er came back to his senses, he felt a little confused. What kind of help? Fan Qingjiao looked at the palace servants outside and said, come here. Drag this arrogant slave down and fight to death soon. Several palace servants walked in, holding the maid and heading out. At this time, the maidservant was really scared. She looked at Guan Pan'er crying and begging, Third princess, please save this maidservant. Guan Pan'er didn't expect that things would turn out like this, so she opened her mouth and said, it's better. Fan Qingjiao interrupted directly, Didn't you hear what the third prince said just now? What are you doing in a daze? Drag this slave out quickly. Just now, Guan Pan'er deliberately used the death of the maid to force Fan Qingjao to submit. Unexpectedly, Fan Qingjao caught her and beat her up. If Guan Pan'er was still waiting to be married, she would have disdained the life and death of a slave, but now that she is married, she naturally understands the importance of a maid as a dowry. She only brought 2 maids with her when she got married, and now one of them was beaten to death by Fan Qingjao. Does Fan Qingjao want to be so cruel? Is it cruel? Fan Qingjao doesn't think so. If she had a kind heart in front of her opponents, she would be the one who would die in an ugly way. Besides, if this matter is brushed aside today, I don't know what method Guan Pan'er will use to continue to block people in the future. Only by letting her be bitten by a snake and fearing the well rope for 10 years can this thought be cut off forever. No one else expected that things would turn out like this. Originally, Fan Qingjao had to swallow the fly, but now it turned into Fan Qingjao helping the third prince and concubine clean up their house. Guan Pan'er sat there with a pale face, her expression was very ugly, and she had long lost the domineering look she had just now. Fan Xuening just looked at Guan Pan'er's embarrassed figure quietly, and she was already laughing in her heart. What else could she say, asking her to come over and see with her own eyes how Fan Qingjao was defeated, but what was the result? Fan Qingjao turned an army against him. Just at this time, Yunyu walked in. I heard the noise here from a distance. I just saw some palace people kidnapping a maid, but what happened? As soon as Guan Pan'er saw Yunyu, tears flowed out unsatisfactorily, but she also knew that she wouldn't care about what happened just now even if she said it, so she could only keep her mouth closed and shed tears. Upon seeing this, Princess Yunyu looked at the others curiously, and said as if joking, "Could it be that one of you bullied the third princess for being new and ignorant?" The other princes and concubines did not dare to accept these words. On the contrary, Yan Hanbei, the princess of Pinglai, smiled and told the story of what had just happened, avoiding the important points. So that's what happened. In this way, the third prince must thank the crown prince properly. A slave like that, regardless of size, should be put to death. Yunyu patted Guan with concern. Pan'er's shoulders, but a flash of disappointment quickly flashed in his eyes. In fact, she had known for a long time that Guan Pan'er was not very peaceful during this period, but she thought it was good for Guan Pan'er to have the idea to help Bailey Rongs share his worries, so she didn't do much to stop her. Unexpectedly, in the end, it got to the point where he lost his wife and lost his troops. Princess Yunyu said something serious. Fan Qingjao didn't expect Guan Pan'er to thank her. But speaking of Yunyu, if she doesn't show up earlier, she will show up later, but she comes right after her front legs are taken away. I'm afraid she has been secretly staring at this place for a long time, but now she can still pretend to have just learned about it. The expression on his face shows that the city is really deep. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 970. Chapter 970. The Princess of Heshuo County visits. Seeing that the matter had come to an end, the 8th prince's concubine couldn't stand being frozen like this, so she took the initiative to talk about the horse riding and shooting competition in the next few days. Yunyu simply stayed and chatted with the others. They waited until the night around them was dark, and then everyone got up and dispersed. Guan Pan'er walked angrily at the back. She waited until everyone was almost gone before she looked at Fan Xuening behind her and said, "Bitch, your heart really is still for Fan Qingjao, right?" Fan Xuening said calmly, "I don't understand the meaning of the third prince's words. Stop pretending to be there. You have just been watching with cold eyes. Don't think that I don't know what you are thinking. I tell you, as long as I am here, you will always be just an ant." Guan Pan'er pointed at Fan Xuening's hand. Nose cursed. I have told the third prince's concubine a long time ago that the prince is not an easy person to deal with. Do not act rashly if you are not completely sure. It is the third prince who does not believe what I said. How can you blame me now? Fan Swinning said with a faint smile. Fan Kinjao now is very different from the one in the dream. Even she has to be careful. How can a arrogant Guan Panner be Fan Kinjao's opponent? Guan Panner was so angry that she was about to fight. It happened that Yun Yu came back and took Fan Swinning away at this time. No matter how unwilling Guan Panner was, she could only watch Fan Swinning's figure walking further and further away. When Fan Kinjao went back, both King Xin and Rengear were already asleep without disturbing anyone. Fan Kinjao also returned to his yard and fell asleep. Early the next morning, Fan Kinjao was woken up by a burst of laughter. After putting on my clothes and walking out of the back room, I saw Bailey Fengming sitting on the sofa, patiently explaining the meaning of one of the passages in the book to Rengear. Brother Ren was enlightened early, but now he can really hear a few things, but the admiration behind him is too annoying. One moment he got into Bailey Fengming's arms, and the next moment he pulled Brother Ren. Her hair on the temples was like a little loach slithering between the two of them. Wu Kaiozhuo was standing aside respectfully, not daring to show any signs of anger. If King Xin hadn't woken up in the morning and made a fuss to find her sister-in-law, she wouldn't have rushed over with the child in her arms. As a result, her sister-in-law didn't see her. Instead, she bumped into His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, who arrived at an unknown time and was leaning against his body while reading a book. King Xin, who was still noisy and joyful at first, suddenly stopped, and then stretched out his arm towards a certain place. Bailey Fengming turned around with King Xin in his arms and saw Fan Kinjao walking over. "Why don't you sleep more?" Fan Kinjao shook his head. "Why do you have time to come?" Bailey Fengming said with a smile, "You seems to be a little uncomfortable with the palace environment. She cried non-stop last night. The Queen Mother wanted to find a playmate for you, but she couldn't find anyone else. Don't worry, I thought about letting me come over to pick up King Xin and have some fun." Yu is Fan Swinning's flesh and blood, that is, Fan Kinjao's niece. When Fan Kinjao was able to successfully deliver Yu, he had no intention of looking at the child with any color. Moreover, he was a pitiful child. If the queen had not shown mercy, he would not have lived to this age. Moreover, Yu's identity is respected as a princess. Regardless of whether Fan Swinning's identity can be seen in the light, she is still a descendant of the dragon and the phoenix. If King Xin can form a good relationship with Yu, it will be considered a blessing for herself. Of course I feel relieved when I go to the Queen Mother's place, Fan Kinjao said, and asked Wu Kaiozhuo to call the enamored wet nurse over. There was no need for anything else, but the wet nurse had to follow her all the time. When King Xin was not hungry, she would not follow the nanny at all. No matter how much the nanny coaxed her, King Xin just relied on Bailey Fengming and refused to come down. Wu Kaiozhuo thought that since yesterday, King Xin was actually quite attached to Cao Lishan. Maybe King Xin could be more obedient with her, but when she thought about going to the Queen's palace, she kept her mouth shut after thinking about it. In the end, Bailey Fengming said, "I'll carry her there, and I'll carry her back later." Fan Kinjao nodded helplessly, fearing that this was all he could do. Queen Zhen 11 had heard that Fan Kinjao had a younger sister earlier, but she had never seen her. Now she finally saw her. She looked like a miniature version of Fan Kinjao. But she liked Queen Zhen 11 so much that there was nothing good about it in the palace. All the fun things to eat were piled in front of King Xin. It's strange to say that Yu cried so hard that her voice became hoarse, but when she saw Qing Xin, she calmed down and started crawling around behind Qing Xin without making any noise. Just fell asleep. Seeing this, Queen Zhen 11 was relieved. Lily immediately sent a message to Fan Kinjao, saying that she would send him back after dinner. Fan Kinjao really didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but it was a blessing to be favored by the queen. After lunch, Princess Heshuo arrived with Crown Prince Jingchuan. Prince Jingchuan is still the same. He is a small man with an expression that does not suit his age. No matter how you look at it, he looks like a little old man. Sister Qinjiao. Prince Jingchuan bowed politely and said hello. Fan Qinjiao smiled and pulled him up. We are all a family, there is no need for these complicated etiquette. The Crown Prince of Qingchuan, however, said solemnly, those who are praised by the master will have a banquet in the east, Shaobei, and west. The guests will bow to those who will be crowned, and those who will be crowned will sit down at the banquet. Fan Qinjiao was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at the Princess of Heshuo County. Princess of Heshuo County. Look at me, I don't understand either. The Princess of Heshuo County was quite helpless when she saw her son's strict behavior, but his lessons were always taught by his own prince himself, so she really couldn't get in the way. Fan Qinjiao also didn't expect that Prince Heshuo, who seemed to be such a happy person, could be so rigid and strict in educating his children. Just as he was thinking about it, his sleeves suddenly tightened. He looked down and saw Brother Ren staring at him. Looking at the little Prince Jingchuan, his little eyes flashed with great doubts. I guess he was also very frightened. After a long while, Brother Ren finally said in a sweet voice, "Little aunt, my father said that all teachers are old and skilled, and the younger they are, the more knowledgeable they are. I don't know that this gentleman has become more noble this year. I'm almost as tall." Fan Qinjiao. Is this how old and exquisite is used? In medical science, it is true that aging and shrinkage are important, because the height of a person's upper body is determined by the length of the back spine, and the lower body is determined by the length of the legs. As age increases, the back spine will undergo degenerative changes and shorten. Fan Qinjiao taught Brother Ren patiently. The Princess of Heshuo County really wanted to cover her face when she saw her goddaughter carrying her little nephew to teach her. After returning home this time, she said she would ask the prince to reduce his homework. Otherwise, if he continues to teach like this, his wife will have to be buried before she is married. End of this chapter.